The Galactic Confederation had established peace across 3 spiral arms for over 2 millennia. In that time, they'd encountered 47 sentient species, cataloged 16 million planets, and developed a bureaucracy so complex it required its own moon. What they hadn't expected was humans. Captain Thora Vazek stood at the viewport of Nexus Station, her 4-fingered hand tapping rhythmically against her thigh. Her violet skin reflected the starlight as she watched the approaching Earth vessel. Humans had only achieved FTL travel 20 years ago, practically newborns in galactic terms, yet they'd already earned a reputation that made veteran spacefarers nervous. "Captain, the human delegation will dock in approximately 7 minutes, chirped her assistant, Lieutenant Plex, a small avian being with metallic feathers that rustled when he was anxious. Right now, he was practically molting. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Is there a problem?" Thora asked, noting his agitation. Plex's head bobbed in the gesture his species used to indicate discomfort. "Reports from other stations, Captain. The humans are unpredictable." Thora suppressed a smile. The Nexi were known for their caution, evolutionary baggage from evolving on a world with 37 apex predators. "I've read the reports, Plex. They're just stories. With respect, Captain, I've verified 3 separate incidents myself. On Outpost Zeta-9, a human engineer entered a radiation chamber without protection to fix a critical system. On Tantalus Prime, humans volunteered to explore the toxic caves. And just last month, a human diplomat ate Gorgaxian spice paste on a dare. Thora blinked all 3 of her eyes. "The paste that causes temporary blindness and projectile vomiting," Plex added, feathers quivering. "They called it fun." The station's announcement system chimed. "Earth vessel Curiosity has docked at Bay 12. Human delegation proceeding to diplomatic quarters." Thora straightened her uniform. As station commander and the Confederation's representative, first impressions mattered. "Remember protocol, Lieutenant. The humans are here to establish formal trade relations. They may have unusual customs, but they're now part of our galactic community." "Yes, Captain, but perhaps we should increase security. Their psychological profiles are concerning." "How so?" Plex pulled up a data tablet. "They exhibit minimal fear responses to stimuli that would paralyze most species. They find amusement in simulated danger. Some deliberately seek out hazardous activities for recreation. And most disturbing," he lowered his voice, "they form emotional attachments to clearly dangerous creatures. They call them pets." Thora had heard this before. Humans kept predators in their homes, scaled cliffs for entertainment, and willingly immersed themselves in bodies of water despite lacking gills. While fascinating from an anthropological perspective, surely the reports were exaggerated. "We'll manage, Lieutenant. After all, we're trained diplomats. How surprising can they really be?" 3 hours later, Thora had her answer. The preliminary meeting had gone smoothly enough. Credentials exchanged, pleasantries observed, the usual diplomatic dance. The human delegation seemed normal, professional even, if slightly more informal than Confederation standard. Then she met Lieutenant Dave Mercer, the human security liaison. "Killer view you've got here, Captain Vazek," he said, gesturing toward the viewport where a Class II neutron star pulsed in the distance. "That thing putting out much radiation, approximately 47,000 rems per second. Thora replied cautiously. "That's why the station has quintuple layered shields on this side." Dave whistled, a peculiar human sound. "Nice. So if the shields failed, we'd have what, maybe 2 minutes before cellular breakdown." 17.3 seconds, corrected Plex, horrified. "Cool, cool." Dave nodded appreciatively, as though admiring a piece of art rather than discussing instantaneous death. "You guys ever suit up and go out there for a closer look? The spectrum must be amazing." Thora stared at him. "That would be suicide, Lieutenant Mercer." "Nah, with the right shielding, you could get a good 30 seconds of observation time." He grinned. "Worth it for the photos alone." And that was when Thora understood that every story she'd heard about humans might actually be an understatement. The formal reception for the human delegation was scheduled in Nexus Station's Grand Atrium, a massive chamber with transparent ceiling panels that showcased the spectacular stellar panorama. Most species found it intimidating, billions of stars reminding them how small they were in the cosmic scale. Humans apparently found it awesome, and requested tables directly under the clearest panels. Thora monitored the event from a distance, observing the interactions between her staff and the Earth representatives. Most of the delegation behaved with reasonable decorum, but Lieutenant Dave Mercer continued to perplex her. "Captain Vazek," he called, waving her over to where he stood with a group of wide-eyed junior officers. "Just the person I wanted to see. We're having a debate about your station's emergency protocols." Thora approached cautiously. Is there a concern, Lieutenant? More of a curiosity. These fine folks tell me you've got 37 different emergency drills. That seems excessive. Preparedness ensures survival, Lieutenant. The Confederation has cataloged over 5,000 potential space station emergencies. Dave's eyebrows shot up. 5,000, and you only drill for 37, seems like you're slacking. The junior officers gasped collectively. Questioning a station captain's safety protocols was considered somewhere between blasphemy and treason. We prioritize the most likely scenarios, Thora explained, keeping her voice level. The statistical probability of, yeah, but what about the fun ones? Dave interrupted, taking a sip from his drink, which Thora noted was definitely not the non-alcoholic option provided to security personnel. Fun, emergencies. Plex had materialized at her side, datapad already recording this bizarre human perspective. Sure, like, what's your protocol for, say, dimensional rifts, or sentient space fungi? Or, Dave snapped his fingers, gravity reversal. That'd be wild. Thora blinked all three eyes in succession, a sign of confusion in her species. Those scenarios have a combined probability of less than 0.0002%. So you're saying there's a chance? Dave grinned, using his drink to point at her. See, on Earth ships we run what we call chaos drills. Completely unexpected, often ridiculous scenarios. Keeps the crew sharp. That sounds highly inefficient, Plex muttered. Dave shrugged. Maybe. But when the garbage compactor on the Curiosity evolved sentience last year, guess who knew exactly what to do? The junior officers looked at each other, then back at Dave. One of them, a Trilaxian with translucent skin, actually raised his hand. That was a joke, Dave clarified, then paused. Although there was that weird thing with the coffee maker. Before Thora could question this concerning statement about caffeination equipment, alarms began to sound throughout the atrium. The lights dimmed, replaced by the amber glow of emergency systems. Attention all personnel and guests, announced the station's AI in soothing tones, designed not to cause panic. A minor fluctuation in the reactor cooling system has been detected. This is a precautionary measure only. Please remain in your current locations while engineering addresses the issue. Thora watched as various species reacted according to their nature. The Nexi clustered together, feathers puffed in alarm. The gelatinous morphs formed protective spheres. The reptilian saurians hissed softly, eyes darting toward exits. And the humans? They looked interested. Reactor cooling, huh? Dave was suddenly at her side, studying a station schematic he'd pulled up on his personal device. You're running a Type 7 quantum fusion system. Those have that design flaw in the secondary cooling loop. Thora stared at him. How do you know about our reactor specifications? That's classified information. Dave waved dismissively. We had to study all existing reactor types before we could improve on them. Earth's running Type 9s now, much more stable, though they do occasionally hiccup during solar flares. This is not a hiccup, Lieutenant. If the cooling system fails completely, we'd have approximately 30 minutes before catastrophic meltdown. Instead of showing appropriate concern, Dave's face lit up. Perfect. That's enough time to get in there and fix it manually. Your engineers probably just need an extra set of hands. Plex made a strangled sound. Manual intervention in a compromised reactor? That's against every safety protocol in the Confederation. Dave was already moving toward the exit. Sometimes you gotta bend the rules a little. You coming, Captain? I should remain here to oversee evacuation if necessary. Thora replied automatically, then added, wait, you're not seriously planning to go to the reactor? Why not? I've got reactor certification, part of basic training on Earth ships. It's a 17-deck journey through potentially compromised sections of the station, Thora pointed out. Dave grinned. Sounds like an adventure. Race you there? Before she could respond, her communicator chimed with an urgent message from engineering. The situation was deteriorating more rapidly than expected. The chief engineer, a brilliant but exceedingly cautious Algorian, was recommending immediate evacuation protocols. 26 minutes until critical failure, came the nervous update. Dave was looking at her expectantly, a spark of excitement in his eyes, where any reasonable being would show fear. Why aren't you afraid, human? Thora finally asked, genuinely bewildered. He seemed surprised by the question. Afraid? Of a fixable problem? That's just wasted energy, Captain. He gestured to the star-filled viewport. Now, being out there without a ship, that's scary. This is Tuesday. And with that cryptic Earth reference, he took off running toward the emergency stairwell, leaving Thora with a decision: follow station protocol, or follow the seemingly fearless, or possibly insane, human. She sent Plex to coordinate the reception hall, and found herself hurrying after Lieutenant Mercer, wondering why she was suddenly making the least rational decision of her career. Thora caught up with Dave 3 decks down, where he was charming an access code out of a flustered security officer. The human moved with surprising agility, taking stairs 3 at a time while simultaneously studying station schematics on his device. "Lieutenant Mercer," she called, slightly out of breath. "This is highly irregular. Call me Dave," he replied cheerfully. "And yeah, that's kind of the point. Regular procedures won't cut it when you've got." He glanced at his device. 23 minutes until boom. The security officer's eye stalks quivered in alarm. "We are not going to explode," Thora stated firmly, as much for the officer's benefit as to remind herself. "The engineering team is implementing standard containment protocols." Dave made a skeptical noise. "Standard protocols for a non-standard problem. Look." He held up his device, displaying reactor diagnostics he absolutely should not have access to. "The radiation levels are spiking in a sine wave pattern. That means the magnetic containment field is oscillating." Thora frowned. He was right, which raised several concerning questions about both human technical knowledge and their cybersecurity capabilities. "Even if that's true, what exactly do you propose to do about it?" "Simple. We stabilize the field manually until your engineers can fix the automated system." He started jogging again, forcing her to keep pace. "On Earth ships we call it riding the wave." "That sounds unnecessarily nautical," Thora muttered, following him down another flight of stairs. "Beats certain death by radiation exposure," Dave called back cheerfully. They had descended 12 levels when Thora's communicator chimed again. It was Commander Oz, her engineering chief. "Captain, we've identified the problem." The Algorian's voice wavered slightly. "A group of unauthorized transmissions penetrated our firewalls exactly 47 minutes ago. Our security systems failed to recognize them as malicious." Dave, who was apparently eavesdropping, stopped so abruptly that Thora nearly collided with him. "A cyber attack." His expression had changed, no longer playful but intensely focused. "That's not a coincidence." Thora felt her scales tighten, her species equivalent of a chill. "Explain." "The human delegation arrives, and suddenly your systems are compromised. Someone's trying to sabotage the diplomatic mission." He lowered his voice. "Or they're using it as cover for something bigger." As if confirming his suspicions, emergency lighting throughout the stairwell suddenly switched from amber to red, and a new alarm, higher pitched and more urgent, began to sound. "Alert. Security breach detected in docking bay 12. Unknown hostiles have boarded the station. All personnel implement protocol Obsidian." This is not a drill. Docking bay 12, where the human ship had arrived. Dave's expression darkened. "They used our credentials to get aboard. Classic false flag operation." Thora's communicator erupted with panicked reports from all sectors. The reactor situation was dire enough, but now armed intruders were spreading through the lower decks. Their tactics suggested military training, and they were methodically disabling security checkpoints. "We need to get to the command center," Thora said, her training kicking in. "From there I can coordinate." An explosion somewhere below them shook the stairwell, sending dust raining down from the ceiling. "Command center's probably their primary target," Dave said, checking his sidearm, a surprisingly primitive-looking projectile weapon. "We'd be walking into a trap." "Then what do you suggest?" "We cannot simply hide while my station is under attack." Dave was quiet for a moment, an unusual state for him based on their brief acquaintance. Then he looked up at her with an expression she couldn't interpret. "We need to split up. You head for auxiliary control on deck 7. I'll continue to the reactor. If they're smart, they'll use the reactor situation as leverage." "That's exactly why we should focus on securing the reactor first, together," Thora argued. Dave shook his head. "Divide and conquer, our side, not theirs." "Trust me, Captain, I've been in situations like this before." "How is that possible? You're a diplomatic security liaison." His smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say Earth's diplomatic efforts haven't always gone smoothly." Another explosion rocked the station, closer this time. The lighting flickered ominously. 17 minutes until critical reactor failure, announced the station AI, its soothing tones now seeming inappropriately calm. Thora made a decision. "Very well, I'll proceed to auxiliary control, but Lieutenant Dave, do not attempt any heroics. Assess the reactor situation and report back." "That's an order." He gave her a mock salute. "Yes, ma'am. Just one thing before we split up. Can I borrow your station access card? Mine's Limited. Thora hesitated, then removed her secondary access card from her uniform. This will get you through most security doors, but not the reactor chamber itself. I'll figure something out, he said, pocketing the card with a wink that did nothing to reassure her. They parted at the next landing, Thora heading horizontally toward auxiliary control while Dave continued his descent toward the reactor core. As she moved through the increasingly chaotic station, coordinating with security teams and tracking the intruder's progress, one question kept circling in her mind. What kind of species produced individuals who ran toward danger with a smile? Her answer came 16 minutes later, when auxiliary control reported a bizarre development at the reactor level. Lieutenant Dave Mercer had somehow accessed the chamber, locked himself inside with 3 armed intruders, and was now, according to the confused engineer on the comms, singing something about taking hostages to a hostage situation. The reactor readings were stabilizing, but Thora suddenly had a much more pressing concern: the apparently suicidal, or possibly brilliant, human who had just changed the game entirely. Auxiliary control was a chaos of blinking monitors and panicked officers when Thora arrived. 6 different species of Confederation personnel huddled around workstations, their attention split between reactor diagnostics and security feeds, showing armed intruders moving through the station. Status report, Thora demanded, assuming command with practiced efficiency. A Zeralian officer with trembling appendages responded first. 15 intruders confirmed, Captain. They've secured docking bays 12 through 14, and are moving toward central operations. They're using some kind of scrambling technology that's interfering with our internal sensors, and the reactor, stabilized. But, the officer hesitated. But what? The officer gestured to a security feed showing the reactor control room. Lieutenant Dave Mercer was visible, working calmly at a control panel while 3 armed figures stood nearby. Despite being held at gunpoint, he appeared to be whistling. Is there audio? Thora asked, incredulous. A switch was flipped, and Dave's voice filled the control room. So then I said to the Andromedan ambassador, "That's not a phase inverter, that's my lunch." He laughed at his own joke, while adjusting something on the panel. Humor's universal, right? Although you guys don't seem like the laughing type. More the shoot first, ask questions never crowd. One of the armed figures jabbed him with a weapon. Stop talking and work faster. Hey, careful with that. You puncture my suit, and we all get to enjoy a radiation bath together. Dave continued adjusting controls without showing any signs of stress. Speaking of which, who sent you guys? The Cartesian Collective? The Rigelian Dominion? Or is this some freelance terrorism? I'm just curious about the employment benefits in your line of work. Shut up, human, growled another intruder. Fine, fine, just trying to make conversation while I save all our lives. You're welcome, by the way. Thora watched, bewildered, as Dave continued working while maintaining a one-sided conversation with his captors. What is he doing? Why hasn't he been executed yet? According to reactor control logs, a Mentak engineer reported, he's implementing a manual stabilization protocol. It's unorthodox, but it's working. The containment field has stopped fluctuating, and the intruders are allowing this because they appear to need the reactor operational, Captain. Our analysts believe they're planning to steal quantum processing components. The reactor was destabilized to create a diversion, but they need it functioning to power down the security systems properly. Thora processed this information quickly, so Lieutenant Mercer is playing along while buying us time, finished the engineer, a note of reluctant admiration in their synthesized voice. Thora opened a secure channel to the reactor room. Lieutenant Mercer, this is Captain Vazik. Can you hear me? On the screen, Dave's eyes flicked toward a communication panel, but he made no move toward it. Instead, he raised his voice slightly. You know what I love about Confederation stations? The redundant communication systems. Like how control rooms can hear everything happening in the reactor, even without an open channel. Super convenient. A flash of understanding hit Thora. He's telling us he can hear us but can't respond directly. What should we do, Captain? Asked her security chief. Standard protocol would be to lock down all systems and prepare for boarding defense. Thora watched Dave on the screen. He was working on something beneath the main control panel now, hidden from his captor's view. Not this time. Lieutenant Mercer clearly has a plan. Let's see if we can determine what it is. As if on cue, Dave began speaking loudly again. You know what's really impressive about this Type 7 reactor? The emergency venting system. In case of catastrophic failure, it can channel the plasma directly into adjacent chambers. Like hypothetically, Maintenance Bay 4J, which is completely automated, so no innocent bystanders. The security chief frowned. Is he suggesting He wants us to prepare to vent the reactor plasma, Thora said, understanding dawning. Not into space but into a specific section of the station. That's insane, objected the Exarelian. Even if Maintenance Bay 4J is automated, the plasma would melt through bulkheads within minutes, potentially compromising the entire structural integrity of Deck 16. Thora was already consulting station schematics. Unless, computer, show me all pathways connecting Maintenance Bay 4J to docking bays 12 through 14. The display shifted, highlighting a maintenance tunnel system. Of course, she whispered. The intruders must have accessed the station through these tunnels. They're planning to retreat the same way once they've secured whatever they're after. On the screen, Dave had moved to another panel. You know plasma's funny stuff. Gets everywhere if you let it. Like water, but you know million-degree water that melts everything it touches. Good thing these maintenance tunnels have emergency bulkheads every 50 meters. He's telling us to prepare a trap, Thora said with growing certainty. We'll need to coordinate emergency bulkhead closures to contain the plasma flow, and direct it toward the intruders. The security team looked at her with expressions ranging from shock to outright horror. Captain, with all due respect, the security chief said carefully, we're talking about using the most dangerous substance on the station as a weapon. If anything goes wrong, we lose the station anyway. Thora finished for him. The intruders have clearly planned this operation meticulously. They've compromised our systems, neutralized our standard security measures, and created multiple simultaneous crises. She straightened to her full height, making a decision that went against every safety protocol in her training. Sometimes, Lieutenant Mercer might be right. Unconventional problems require unconventional solutions. Turning back to the screen, she saw Dave glance directly at the camera for a split second, the ghost of a smile on his face. Begin preparations for emergency plasma venting, she ordered. But do it quietly, no digital communications that could be intercepted. And someone get me a direct line to that reactor room. I need to understand exactly what our human friend is planning before we potentially melt a hole in my station. As her crew scrambled to comply, Thora couldn't help but wonder if she was making the most brilliant decision of her career, or if she'd succumbed to the peculiar madness that humans seem to radiate like solar flares. Either way, in approximately 12 minutes, they were all going to find out. This is either brilliance or suicide, muttered the Mentak engineer, as they finalized the reactor venting protocols. Possibly both. Thora had managed to establish a tenuous communication link with the reactor room. By manipulating maintenance diagnostic signals, which the intruders were apparently ignoring, she could send simple text messages to a display near where Dave was working. Her first message was direct explain plan. On the security feed, she watched Dave glance at the display. Without missing a beat in his constant chatter to his increasingly irritated captors, he shifted positions to block their view of his hands. His fingers tapped out commands that sent diagnostic data to auxiliary control, data that, when properly interpreted, outlined his strategy. Unbelievable, breathed the security chief as the details became clear. He's planning to create a controlled plasma surge, vent it through the maintenance tunnels, and use it to herd the intruders back toward their ships, while simultaneously triggering a radiation alarm that will force them to wear their emergency breathing apparatus, continued the Cerelian officer, catching on, making them vulnerable to the sedative gas he's synthesizing from reactor coolant, finished Thora. A gas that would be filtered by our station personnel's standard emergency masks, but not by the intruders' likely equipment. The security team exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. It could work, admitted the chief. If the timing is perfect, if the plasma flow is precisely controlled, if the intruders react exactly as predicted, and if Lieutenant Mercer can actually synthesize a sedative from coolant chemicals. Those are a lot of ifs, Thora acknowledged. But do we have a better option? Before anyone could respond, alarms blared across the control room. On the main screen, a new alert flashed. Command center breached. Captain Vazek requested for negotiation. They think I'm still in the command center, Thora realized. This works in our favor. They don't know we're operating from auxiliary control. She sent another message to Dave. Intruders seeking negotiation. Time estimate. On screen, Dave scratched his ear, a signal they'd established to indicate he'd seen the message. He leaned over to adjust a dial, casually saying to his captors, "You know, friends, this would go a lot faster if you'd stop poking me with those guns. I need about 7 more minutes to complete the stabilization sequence." "You said that 10 minutes ago," growled one of the intruders. Dave shrugged. Quantum mechanics is unpredictable. It's literally in the name. Thora turned to her team. We have 7 minutes. Confirm all evacuation routes for non-essential personnel, ensure all emergency bulkheads are ready for remote operation, and prepare the ventilation system for gas dispersal. As her crew raced to implement the final preparations, Thora found herself reflecting on the absurdity of the situation. In all her years of command, she had never authorized a plan that violated so many safety protocols simultaneously. Yet here she was, about to pump superheated plasma through maintenance tunnels and flood her station with synthesized sedative gas, all based on the improvised plan of a human who treated mortal danger like an amusing puzzle. "Captain," called the security chief, "we've detected movement in the maintenance tunnels connecting to Docking Bay 13. It appears the intruders are beginning to transport cargo, likely the quantum processors they came for." "Perfect timing," Thora replied. "They'll be concentrated in the tunnels when we execute the plan." She sent a final message to Dave: "Ready. Await your signal." On screen, Dave had finished whatever adjustments he was making to the reactor controls. He straightened up, stretched casually, and turned to his captors. "All done. Reactors stable. No boom today. Boom tomorrow, maybe, but definitely not today." "Step away from the controls," ordered one of the intruders. Sure. Just need to initiate the final sequence." Dave reached for a prominent red button. "Stop," shouted another intruder, raising their weapon. "What does that do?" Dave paused, his hand hovering over the button. This is just the confirmation control. Completes the stabilization protocol." The intruders looked at each other uncertainly. "Seriously, guys, if I wanted to blow us all up, I could have done it 15 minutes ago." Dave rolled his eyes. "Though I gotta say, for professional saboteurs, you really should know more about reactor technology." Before they could respond, he slammed his palm down on the button. For a moment, nothing happened. The intruders relaxed slightly, then all hell broke loose. Warning lights flashed throughout the station. The reactor's core glowed brighter as plasma began flowing through emergency channels never designed for this purpose. On multiple security feeds, Thora watched maintenance tunnel sections glow orange, then white-hot as the plasma surged through them. In the reactor room, Dave had taken advantage of the momentary distraction to drop to the floor, rolling beneath the control console. Radiation alarms screamed as the automated system detected the unusual plasma flow, triggering emergency protocols station-wide. "Emergency radiation alert," announced the station AI. "All personnel don protective breathing apparatus immediately." Throughout the station, Confederation officers donned their regulation masks. In the maintenance tunnels, security feeds showed the intruders scrambling to put on their own breathing equipment. Simpler devices that, as Dave had predicted, wouldn't filter the specific chemical compound now being pumped through the ventilation system. Thora watched in astonishment as the plan unfolded with unlikely precision. The plasma flow, carefully directed through sequential bulkhead operations, drove the intruders away from their stolen cargo and back toward their ships. Within minutes, they began showing signs of disorientation as the sedative took effect. "Security teams in position at all docking bays," reported the chief. "Intruders are contained and increasingly incapacitated." "And Lieutenant Mercer?" Thora asked, suddenly realizing she'd lost sight of him on the reactor room feed. As if in answer, the door to auxiliary control hissed open, and a figure in a slightly scorched uniform staggered in, pulling off a breathing mask. "Did we win?" asked Dave, his face smudged with soot, but wearing an irrepressible grin. "Because if not, I've got at least 2 more terrible ideas we could try." "How did you?" Thora began, then stopped herself. "The maintenance shafts. You used the same tunnels as the plasma." "Well, not the exact same ones," Dave clarified, collapsing into a vacant chair. "That would have been fatal. I took a parallel route, staying ahead of the emergency bulkheads. Basic training stuff, really." The control room had fallen silent, all eyes on the human who had just outmaneuvered a station full of hostiles, using nothing but reactor plasma, coolant chemicals, and what appeared to be complete disregard for personal safety. "Lieutenant Mercer," Thora said formally, "your actions today were reckless, unauthorized, and in violation of at least 17 Confederation safety protocols." Dave's grin faltered slightly. "They were also," she continued, "the most effective crisis response I have witnessed in my 22 years of service." The grin returned. "So, not getting court-martialed then?" "I believe the human diplomatic contingent would object strongly," Thora replied dryly. "As would I." Security reports were flooding in. All intruders had been captured or contained. The stolen technology was recovered, the plasma had been safely redirected back into the reactor system. Aside from some melted maintenance tunnels and lingering sedative gas in the lower decks, the station had survived remarkably intact. I have to ask, Thora said quietly, as her officers returned to their duties, why aren't you afraid? Anyone else would have panicked in that reactor room with armed hostiles and plasma containment failures. Dave considered this for a moment, his usual flippancy fading into something more thoughtful. It's not that I'm not afraid, he finally said. It's that humans have learned something important about fear, which is, he met her gaze directly, fear is just information. It tells you there's danger, sure, but it doesn't tell you what to do about it. Sometimes the scariest option is the only one that works. Thora found herself speechless, suddenly understanding something fundamental about humans that all the Confederation reports had missed. 3 days after what station personnel had already nicknamed the plasma incident, Nexus Station had returned to something resembling normal operations. Maintenance crews worked around the clock repairing damaged sections, security protocols underwent comprehensive review, and the diplomatic reception, interrupted so dramatically, had been rescheduled with enhanced security measures. The intruders, now in custody, had been identified as mercenaries hired by a rival corporate faction, seeking to disrupt Earth's entry into the Galactic Confederation trading network. Their plan had been sophisticated, their intelligence precise, and their failure, according to intercepted communications, catastrophically unexpected. Captain Thora Vozik stood in her office, gazing out at the neutron star that had first sparked her revealing conversation with Lieutenant Dave Mercer. The human in question was scheduled to meet her in 5 minutes for a formal debriefing before the diplomatic mission departed. Precisely on time, a surprising display of punctuality for him, her door chimed. "Enter," she called, turning from the viewport. Dave walked in, wearing a fresh uniform with the addition of a small unfamiliar insignia on his collar. "Captain Vozik," he greeted her with a respectful nod, though his eyes still held that familiar spark of humor. "Reporting as requested, Lieutenant Mercer," she acknowledged, gesturing to a chair, "or should I say Commander Mercer?" He glanced down at his new insignia, looking slightly embarrassed. "News travels fast, the promotion just came through this morning. Deserved, from what I observed." Thora sat across from him, "Though I suspect there's more to your story than diplomatic security liaison." Dave's expression turned sheepish. Technically that part was true, just incomplete. Earth Special Operations, something like that. We're still new to the galactic community, having a few operatives who can assess potential threats while diplomatic channels develop, seemed prudent. Thora nodded. The Confederation would have done the same in your position. An awkward silence fell between them, neither quite knowing how to address the extraordinary events they'd shared. "I've been thinking about what you said," Thora finally ventured, "about fear being information, not instruction." "Ah, that." Dave smiled. "One of the first lessons in our training. Probably sounds obvious to humans, but I've noticed it's not a universal perspective." "Indeed." Thora leaned forward. "Most species in the Confederation evolved with fear as a primary survival mechanism. When faced with danger, the instinct to retreat, to seek safety is overwhelming. Whereas humans evolved as persistence predators," Dave said. "We chased prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Running toward danger was literally how we survived." "Biological distinction that became a philosophical one," Thora observed. "You don't suppress fear, you redirect it." Dave considered this. "I've never thought about it that way, but yes, fear gives us energy, adrenaline, heightened awareness. The trick is using those responses constructively." Thora rose and walked back to the viewport, inviting Dave to join her with a gesture. Together they looked out at the star, beautiful, deadly, and indifferent to their existence. "The Confederation has cataloged thousands of sentient species," she said quietly. "We've mapped hundreds of evolutionary pathways to intelligence, but I don't believe we've encountered your particular combination before. Is that good or bad?" Dave asked, genuinely curious. "It's instructive." Thora turned to face him. "You should know that my official report includes a recommendation that human representatives be included in Confederation crisis response training. Your perspective could prove valuable." Dave's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously, I figured I'd be banned from Confederation space after breaking every safety protocol in the book." "Sometimes protocols must evolve," Thora replied, "as your actions demonstrated quite effectively." Her communication panel chimed, announcing the imminent departure of the Earth vessel. "I should get going," Dave said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture. "It's been an interesting first contact." Thora accepted the handshake, having studied the protocol. Indeed it has, Commander Mercer. As he turned to leave, she added, "One final question if I may. When you were in that reactor room, with plasma containment failing and armed hostiles watching your every move, was there truly no moment of doubt, no fear that your plan might fail?" Dave paused at the door, his expression becoming serious. "Of course there was. I was terrified the whole time. You certainly didn't show it. That's the real human secret, Captain." His familiar grin returned. "It's not that we aren't afraid, it's that we've learned to function anyway, sometimes even better, with our hearts pounding and our knees shaking." "A useful adaptation," Thora acknowledged. "More than that," Dave said. "It's liberating. When you accept that fear is just part of the experience, not something to avoid at all costs." He gestured toward the stars. "Suddenly the whole universe opens up." With that he offered a final nod and departed, leaving Thora alone with her thoughts. 1 month later, enrollment in Nexus Station's newly established Adaptive Crisis Response Program had exceeded all projections. The course, co-designed by Confederation experts and human consultants, focused on creative problem-solving under extreme pressure. The most popular session, consistently oversubscribed, was a simulation based on actual events, titled, "The Plasma Incident, When Protocol Meets Ingenuity." And in Captain Vozik's office, a small Earth artifact had joined her collection of interstellar memorabilia, a simple wooden plaque bearing a human phrase that had finally made sense to her. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." She found herself looking at it often, particularly when gazing out at the neutron star that now seemed less threatening and more interesting. Perhaps the humans were onto something after all.